Greg raised his glass like he was baptizing a new saint. "To Megan," he boomed, just loud enough for the music to fade around him. "Our new director of client operations. Long hours really do pay off, if you know what I mean." He didn't just wink, he practically threw it across the room like a dart, straight into my chest. A few chuckles, a couple of stiff, uncomfortable smiles, then silence. Megan's lips twitched into a frozen smile, her wine glass trembling slightly. My jaw locked. I didn't move. I just watched. Greg made a show of clapping me on the back, as if we were old pals. "You married a hard worker," he said, his voice coated in that thick, performative camaraderie that always smells like scotch and insecurity. "Hope you're not the jealous type, Darren." He held my eye for a second too long, clearly waiting for me to break, maybe mutter something, maybe flinch, maybe yank my wife away and start some scene that would confirm every smug little stereotype he had, spinning in that overconfident hamster wheel he called a brain. Instead, I smiled, just a small one, the kind you'd miss if you blinked. Then I raised my own glass, not toward him, not even toward Megan, just to the room, a polite, meaningless gesture. I sipped, swallowed, and let that uncomfortable silence grow roots. Greg wasn't used to being ignored. You could see it in how he lingered beside me, fishing for a reaction. Megan reached for his arm in a too casual way, laughing, Okay, let's not roast me while I'm still sober." Her tone was light, but her knuckles were pale from gripping her clutch. I'd been to exactly 3 of these parties in all the years we'd been married. I hated them. Hated the synthetic laughter, the fake camaraderie, the cardboard hors d'oeuvres passed around like some kind of loyalty test. But I came tonight because Megan asked, because she said it was important, because she earned something and wanted me there beside her. Instead, I ended up standing across from a man who thought he was clever. It's a funny thing. Watching someone poke a bear they don't know is chained to a steel post that's starting to rust. Greg thought he was dealing with a stiff old husband, the kind you can bully without consequence. He had no idea I once trained forensic interviewers for intelligence agencies, that I wrote threat profiles for multinational corporations, that I spent 3 decades analyzing people like him right before I pulled their careers out from under them with a single binder. But I didn't say any of that. I just watched, measured, calculated. "Greg likes to test people," Megan whispered later as we stood in the corner by the food station. "He does it to every spouse. It's like a stupid initiation thing. Ignore him." "Just once?" I asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes flitted away. Some people yell, some people throw punches, but the most dangerous men are the ones who go quiet, not because they're weak, but because they're watching the weak ones hand them every weapon they'll ever need. By the way, more than 90% of people listening to stories like this never hit that subscribe button. And that's wild, because it's the one thing that tells our team these stories are worth telling. If you're here and still reading, don't be like Greg. Do something useful. Tap that button. It means a lot more than you think. Later that night, Megan laid her head on my shoulder as we rode home in silence. I could feel the tension in her neck, the quiet guilt she didn't know how to name. Greg had won that round in her mind. She thought I was humiliated. She thought I'd swallow it. She didn't realize that silence wasn't surrender. It was staging. Because I wasn't humiliated, I was amused. And Greg had just become the most interesting project I'd had in a decade. Greg found me again near the charcuterie table, nursing a club soda and mentally calculating the exits. "So how long have you two been together?" he asked, sliding in beside me like we were old drinking buddies. His tone was syrupy and sharp, friendly to the untrained ear, but lined with barbed wire. "She's got quite the drive. Ambition like that usually burns through relationships. You keeping up okay?" I didn't look at him, just sliced off a corner of manchego and let him twist in his own smugness for a beat. "Where'd you go to school, Greg?" I asked casually, not with interest, more like checking the make of a toaster before tossing it out. He blinked. "Me? UC Davis. Marketing." I nodded once. "And who trained you?" His brow knit. "What do you mean?" I turned toward him, smiled slightly. Not a warm smile, more like the kind you offer a spider right before you pin it under glass. "Someone must have taught you this little routine, the passive-aggressive peacocking, the insecure needling, or is it just instinctual?" He chuckled, but it cracked halfway through. "Man, I'm just messing around. Don't take it so seriously." I was already walking away before he finished. His laugh followed me, shaky and unsure, bouncing off the glass walls of that sterile office event space. I didn't need to look back. Men like Greg don't get challenged often, especially not by someone they think they've already disarmed. Back at Megan's side, I poured her another drink. Her smile was brittle. Her shoulders were tense. "He's just like that," she said too quickly. "He does this with new spouses. Tries to get under their skin, like to see if they can handle the culture." I swirled my glass, eyes on her, reading everything she wasn't saying. "Just once?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, tilted her head like she was trying to convince herself. "He means well, just he has no filter." She'd rehearsed that line before, probably used it to explain away a dozen similar incidents. That phrase, he has no filter, was the corporate equivalent of boys will be boys, harmless, until you looked at the bodies left in its wake. She leaned in close. "Don't do anything, okay? Just, please." I kissed her temple. "Of course. Nothing at all." That night, Megan went to bed early, said she was tired. I sat in the living room, lights dimmed, the glow of the street lamps painting soft yellow bars across the floor. I wasn't angry. That's not what this was. Anger is messy, loud, predictable. This was something else. Greg wasn't a man. He was a symptom, the kind of workplace parasite that slithers his way through org charts by making others too uncomfortable to speak. He didn't just toe the line. He danced on it, challenged people to object, then smothered their protests with charm and plausible deniability. He thought what he did was invisible. It wasn't. He thought he clocked me, sized me up as the quiet, aging husband with soft eyes and a firm handshake. He hadn't. He thought this was over. It wasn't even close. I pulled out an old black notebook from the drawer, a leftover habit from my consulting days. I flipped to a blank page and wrote one word: pattern? Underneath it, I listed 3 names Megan had mentioned over the years. 2 had transferred, 1 had quit abruptly, all had worked under Greg. I wasn't even warmed up yet. Some men think being underestimated is an insult. I think it's a gift. And Greg had just handed me a dozen. When I told Megan I was coming to the next office mixer, she paused mid-sip, coffee halfway to her mouth. "You hate these things," she said, not accusing but puzzled, like I'd just announced I was taking up CrossFit. "I need to see something," I said simply, then added, "You'll barely notice me." She didn't push further, just nodded, but I caught the flicker behind her eyes. Hope, maybe, or fear, hard to tell. She didn't know yet which side of the line I was going to land on. Truth is, neither did I. That morning, I dusted off an old lapel cam from my consulting days. Size of a thumbtack, black, invisible against a navy blazer. I tested the angle in the mirror, adjusted it to make sure the lens aligned with the breast pocket seam. I didn't need high drama. I needed subtle, just enough to confirm a suspicion or to kill it for good. We arrived separately. Optics. I walked in about 10 minutes after her, waved politely to the receptionist, and grabbed a sparkling water at the bar. Same rented space as before. Sterile corporate modernism, all white walls and brushed steel. A place built to be forgettable. Perfect for things no one wanted to remember. Greg was already there, laughing a little too loud. His tie was askew, top button open, like he was halfway through his 3rd bourbon. He lit up when he saw Megan, didn't even glance at me. I watched him orbit her like a drunk planet, leaning too close, making too much eye contact. A joke here, a light arm touch there. I stood with a group near the food table, sipping slowly, angling my chest just right, watching, recording. It didn't take long. Greg leaned in over Megan's shoulder as she was refilling her glass, his voice low and soaked in smugness. "Can't wait to be locked in. Late again. Right, Megs?" She froze. It was slight, just a 2-second hitch in motion, but I caught it. Her jaw tightened. Her hand trembled just slightly over the stem of the wine glass. Greg's hand grazed her shoulder just enough to linger. My eyes tracked it like crosshairs. I didn't flinch. Didn't twitch, just noted it, logged it, let the cam do its work. Later, he passed by me at the bar, tossed out, "Darren, buddy, didn't expect to see you here again. Megan must have dragged you." "She knows what I like," I replied. "Routine, clean spaces, good lighting." He blinked, confused. I smiled. At one point, Megan came over to check on me. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "Peachy," I said, eyes on the room. She hesitated, looking at me like I was wearing someone else's face. You seem different. I'm just listening, I said. Your friend Greg's quite the poet. Her face flushed. He's been drinking. He's just... I held up a hand. I'm not judging you, Megan. She swallowed. Then what are you doing? I leaned close and whispered so only she could hear. I'm measuring the temperature before the fire starts. She didn't ask what that meant, but she stopped defending him after that. On the ride home, she was quiet, one hand in her lap, fingers twisting the strap of her purse like she was tying knots in her own thoughts. I didn't say a word, but the footage was already backed up in 2 places before she finished brushing her teeth. It wasn't just the comment or the touch. It was the pattern. The same way predators test boundaries, never with claws first, but with pressure, repeated increasing pressure, until no one notices how far the line is moved. Greg had tested Megan. He'd tested me. And now, unknowingly, he'd tested the limits of plausible deniability. Too bad for him, I used to train people to recognize exactly this kind of behavior in 5 different languages across 3 continents. But this wasn't a training manual. This was personal. And I just started pressing record. I didn't sleep on it. I didn't pace or brood or rage. I sat down at my desk with a cup of black coffee and started building a file. No fluff, just dates, locations, timestamps, raw footage, and the kind of metadata no one in Greg's pay grade ever thinks to scrub. I knew exactly what I was looking for and where the cracks would start. HR would have buried it. That's not paranoia, it's experience. I've seen too many polished investigations get steered into polite dead ends when the subject's name brought in money or scored high on social metrics. Greg had charm, plausible deniability, and just enough ambiguity to turn harassment into miscommunication if you let him speak first. So I didn't go to HR. I went to Daniel. Daniel and I go back 30 years. We met auditing a pharmaceutical firm in Frankfurt that had quietly misplaced 40 million euros. He's the type who can dissect an expense report the way a surgeon handles a tumor, no emotion, just precision. I sent him the file, no preamble, just the word pattern in the subject line. He called me that afternoon. Jesus, who is this guy? Office parasite, thinks he's clever. He's not. No. You want me to poke around? Quietly. He did better than that. He activated his ghost team, a group of internal compliance consultants who move like rumors and dig like archaeologists. They don't knock, they don't warn, they just appear. Quiet flags, cross-referencing, unobtrusive questioning. They started with Greg's travel reports. Boring stuff to most people, not to Daniel. 3 days later, Daniel called again. We found one. Talk. An expense report from last year, labeled Solo Training Retreat, Leadership Growth, Palm Springs, hotel, meals, flights, 3 nights. And it wasn't solo. 2 names signed the wellness seminar form, Greg's, and someone else, not his manager, not even in the same department. Who? A junior analyst named Emily R. She quit 6 months ago. Abruptly, no exit interview, just disappeared. I stared at the wall. Where was the retreat? Desert Winds Conference Resort. Their website has photos of that year's seminar. Guess who's standing next to Greg in 3 of them? I didn't need to guess. Anything else? She booked her room separately, paid out of pocket for 2 nights, then stopped showing up to events. There's a note in her departure file. Personal conflict with team member, no details provided. HR never followed up. I leaned back, exhaled once. Get me the full thread. I'm on it. Emily wasn't a name Megan had ever mentioned, which meant Greg's behavior didn't start with her. He didn't escalate because he felt safe. He escalated because he'd gotten away with it before. Probably more than once. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe the charm, maybe the way he always made it feel like a joke until it wasn't. But this wasn't a joke anymore. I kept going, pulled Megan's past event schedules, compared them to Greg's travel logs. There was too much overlap, too many off-sites, strategy sessions, working weekends, always in groups, always vague. But the phrasing, God, it was textbook. I'd written entire corporate compliance modules around this garbage. The scary part? It worked because no one looked close enough. Until now. I called Daniel back. Start a second path. Forget just Greg. Check if anyone in HR processed those invoices without cross-checking. You think someone's covering? I think someone's lazy, or scared, or both. This was no longer about Megan. This was about an ecosystem built around silence and plausible deniability. I wasn't tearing down a man. I was pulling loose the thread holding together an entire culture. Greg had no idea. He still thought I was just some stiff husband with a good poker face and a long fuse. Let him. That was the point of a fuse, after all. You don't notice it's lit until it's far too late to run. The thing about arrogance is it always assumes the room is on its side. Greg wasn't just stupid, he was proud of it, proud enough to commit his smug little high school locker room act to writing. The email came in on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line, Office Party MVP, sent from Greg's work address to a few of his inner circle clones. I recognized the names. 2 from sales, 1 from finance, all of them the kind who never asked questions during ethics trainings but nodded a lot and made jokes about HR being too sensitive. In the body of the email, Greg recapped the last mixer like it was a stand-up routine. Darren showed up again, poor guy. Looked like someone's retired uncle wandered in by mistake. Just stood in the corner, sipping seltzer and watching everyone like he was building a psychological profile. Megs is a saint. Props to her for keeping things spicy at home with Mr. AARP. There was more. Lazy jabs about my jacket, some snarky innuendo about Megan liking older mentors, and a gif of Gandalf looking confused in a nightclub. The kind of content that would have barely passed as funny at a college frat party, let alone inside a corporate email system. Greg must have been feeling cocky. Too cocky, because he CC'd someone he shouldn't have. Among the names was Jacob M., head of cyber risk at a global financial partner we'd both done consulting for a few years back. Jacob and I weren't close, but we'd worked enough security audits together to share mutual respect. He didn't say much, never needed to, one of those rare people who understood that silence could be louder than outrage. 5 minutes after Greg hit send, Jacob forwarded me the email with no commentary, just one line under it. Want this archived or escalated? I stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds, not because I was surprised, but because of how perfectly timed it all was. Greg had no idea he'd handed me a loaded gun, safety off, pointed squarely at his own foot. I typed back one sentence. Not yet, let's see where it goes. This was better than anything I could have baited him into. He'd outed himself, in his own words, on company servers, with multiple recipients and time-stamped evidence. Ambiguity, no spin, and if HR tried to sweep it under the rug, that forward chain could land on a dozen desks that actually mattered. Greg was funny, all right. He just didn't realize the punchline was going to be in his termination letter. Instead of reacting, I added the email to the growing dossier. I labeled it Greg Internal Comms Phase 1. I tagged the file, linked it to the footage, and the Palm Springs invoice Daniel uncovered. Pattern, pattern, pattern. Later that day, I stopped by Megan's office under the pretense of taking her to lunch. She looked tired, drained in that specific way people get when their gut is trying to scream something their mouth can't articulate. He's still at it, she said, voice low. This morning he made a comment about me being famous for staying late. I think the new intern heard. You document it? She looked away. I didn't want to seem... I gently tapped the folder in my hand. You don't have to. She blinked. What is that? Insurance, I said. For now. She exhaled, long and slow. Not relief, more like resignation laced with fear. She knew Greg had power, knew he was entrenched, but what she didn't know yet, what Greg definitely didn't know, was that power is only dangerous when it's unchallenged. People like Greg count on others to be too tired, too cornered, too polite to respond. But I wasn't polite, I was patient, and I was building something behind the scenes that no snide email or lazy HR manager could ignore. A slow burning rope made of evidence, silence, and intent. Let Greg keep performing. Every joke was another nail, and the coffin was almost ready. Megan slammed the door harder than usual that evening, keys rattling against the console bowl. Her bag hit the floor with a thud, and she stood in the foyer for a moment like she'd just escaped a burning building. Greg got pulled into a meeting, she said. No hello, no breath, just straight to it. HR looked pale, like visibly uncomfortable. I walked past and caught a few words. Complaints? Plural. And his face, Darren, he wasn't cocky, he was sweating. I set my glass down and met her eyes. He'll go after you next. She blinked, confused. What? He'll panic. He'll need to discredit someone. And you're the nearest threat. Megan's face went cold. Not surprised, just dreading the inevitability. You're serious. I'm prepared. And I was. The folder on my desktop was now a directory. One labeled Tier 1, External Defense. Inside were video files, audio transcripts, expense report cross-checks, and a running timeline linking Greg's behavior to internal events. Complaints filed and ignored, resignations, transfers, and whispered apologies. 2 former employees, Emily R. and Nathan V., had already submitted short statements to Daniel's team. Nothing inflammatory, just facts. Timed encounters, language used, repeated themes, pattern. That night I slept. Deeply. Megan didn't. I could hear her shifting. Her breaths were shallow, restless. She knew what was coming, she just didn't know when or how hard. The answer came at 9:42 a.m. She called me from the parking lot, voice shaking with rage, fear, and something harder to name. He said I blurred lines, she whispered, that I sent signals he misread. Darren, he said I enticed him. I stared out the window. The city was gray, muted, rain coming. Okay, I said. Time to act. 10 minutes later, I sent the file. Not to HR. Not yet. I went directly to the head of compliance, a woman named Karina who years ago helped me root out an embezzlement ring at a logistics firm. I trusted her. More importantly, I knew how she worked. I didn't explain the whole story. I didn't need to. I just wrote, documented pattern of workplace misconduct, escalation attempt currently targeting my wife, Megan L. video evidence, corroborated timelines, and testimonies from former staff attached. This is not an HR problem. This is a liability problem. Within an hour, HR's tone changed. First, radio silence, then panicked outreach, then a calendar invite titled Urgent Harassment Allegation Review. Megan wasn't asked to attend. That was the first clue. Greg was. That was the second. By 2 p.m., a legal rep was looped in. By 3, a new name appeared on the email chain, someone from external counsel. Things were no longer internal, not anymore. At 4:17, Megan texted me 2 words. He knows. I called her. What did he say? He saw the email thread, said I was overreacting, that if I really cared about the team, I'd step back until things cooled down. I could almost hear his voice, lazy, smooth, weaponized charm wrapped in gaslight. Megan, I said slowly, some men shout, others document. The silence on the line felt heavy, like she was recalibrating the man she thought she married. Then she whispered, thank you. But this wasn't gratitude she owed me. This was war she never should have had to fight. Greg didn't know it yet, but he'd already lost the moment he tried to weaponize her silence. The second he reframed her discomfort as consent, her dignity as flirtation. He thought the oldest play in the Predator handbook would buy him one more round of immunity. What it bought was time. For me. To finish the puzzle. Because Greg's shield, the network of plausible deniability, the charm, the manipulation, the lazy smirks, had finally cracked. And all I had to do now was pry it open. One piece at a time. Megan came home that night with a question written all over her face before she even opened her mouth. He asked about you, she said, dropping her bag onto the kitchen counter. Who? David, my supervisor. I raised an eyebrow. What'd he say? She walked toward the fridge, grabbed a soda, then paused, still gripping the handle like she needed something to hold on to. He pulled me aside, quietly, no one else around, and he said, off the record, your husband? Who is he? I smiled just slightly. What did you tell him? I didn't know what to say. I just said you used to do consulting. He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. Then he said, he's not just a consultant, is he? I said nothing. Because now I didn't need to. Darren, the silent husband, Darren, the guy who stood awkwardly at the open bar, Darren, the old man vibe wallflower, that Darren had quietly stepped out of frame. What was left was something else. Something people in positions of power only recognized when it brushed too close to their own shadows. A threat with a spreadsheet. David's whisper meant the shift had begun. What Megan didn't know, what David hadn't said out loud, was that my name had made it into a closed-door conversation that morning, not in a dramatic cloak and dagger way, just a ripple in the right pool. One of the compliance team had worked with me 10 years ago, back when we both gutted a procurement ring bleeding dry a major telecom. He remembered my methods, my patterns, my silence, and now it wasn't just about Greg making off-color jokes and inappropriate touches. That would have been enough. But someone, probably Karina, had decided to look beyond the harassment claims, into Greg's past project files, his billing records, travel logs. That's when the red flags started appearing. 1, then 3, then 5. A 12,000 training conference Greg claimed to attend solo, but no digital check-in existed. A consultant billed as an independent strategist on a European rollout who, when contacted, turned out to be a cousin of Greg's, currently working at a smoothie bar in San Diego. A pattern of double bookings. Greg, allegedly, in 2 different cities on the same day. Sloppy, yes, but consistent. That's what broke them, not the drama, the consistency. The one thing companies hate more than bad PR is audit exposure. And Greg had both wrapped up in a neat, sociopathic little bow. By Thursday, HR froze his system access. They didn't fire him. Not yet. But the badge access glitch he complained about wasn't a glitch. It was the start of a wall closing in. He showed up at Megan's desk around lunchtime. She told me this later. Hands in pockets, too casual posture, fake smile stretching skin that didn't want to cooperate. "Rough week, huh?" he said. "All these accusations. Weird, right? Almost like someone's orchestrating a little drama." Megan stared at him. "Are you saying I made this up?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, I didn't say anything. You said that. I'm just observing." She didn't respond. Didn't need to, because a few feet behind her, one of the compliance managers stood pretending to scroll through her phone while listening. Greg walked away, but he looked rattled. For the first time since this all started, he didn't swagger. He moved like he expected the floor to shift under him at any moment. Later that day, David approached Megan again. No whispers this time. "Greg's being audited," he said bluntly. "Officially, not just HR anymore." Megan said nothing, just nodded, but her hands trembled slightly as she typed. At home, she curled next to me on the couch and whispered, "It's really happening." "It was always going to happen," I said. He just didn't think the quiet guy noticed. Greg had counted on being liked. He'd invested years in networking, handshakes, birthday drinks, harmless humor that wasn't harmless. He weaponized charisma. That's why it worked. No one wanted to believe the likable guy was the rot under the paint. But that was the thing about likable rot. It only needs a little air to turn to dust. And I wasn't done breathing on him. The panel room was the kind of place designed to look neutral. Glass tables, sterile chairs, bottled water lined up like soldiers, a fake plant in the corner to suggest warmth. But the air inside felt surgical, clean, sharp, clinical, the kind of air you breathe before something gets removed. Greg walked in with that familiar half smile, still wearing his defense, charisma, confidence, the belief that he could grin his way out of anything. He saw Megan first and blinked, confusion quickly smothered. Then he saw me, and the smile flickered. His eyes bounced to the HR rep, to the head of compliance, to the external counsel sitting at the far end with a laptop open and 2 pages of notes already typed. He was trying to find the angle, the play, the explanation. He didn't find one. "Have a seat, Greg," Karina said. Her tone wasn't aggressive. It was polite, dangerously polite. He hesitated. Only a second. But in that second, the tension in the room tripled. He sat across from us, shoulders too stiff, like he was trying to grow armor by sheer will. Karina clicked a remote. The lights dimmed. Slide 1, a timeline. Timestamps of multiple internal incidents coded by department. A row of red dots stood out, each marked verified with footnotes. Each matched to Greg's calendar entries, messages, badge swipes. Slide 2, screenshots. Internal emails, Slack messages, and innocuous-looking calendar invites annotated in yellow. Slide 3, the Palm Springs expense report with Greg's name and Emily's. Greg leaned forward. This is out of context. Slide 4, a muted video clip. Greg brushing Megan's shoulder. Can't wait to be locked in late again. Right, Megs? The audio was crystal clear. Greg shot back in his chair, mouth opening. What is this? Who recorded that? That's illegal, right? This is a setup. Karina didn't respond. She turned to me. Before we proceed, I'd like to formally introduce Darren L. He's here as an external compliance risk analyst. He's worked with our partner firm on multiple operational integrity reviews. We brought him in for third-party perspective. Greg's mouth opened again, but nothing came out. I met his eyes. Calm, unblinking. This isn't a setup, I said softly. This is a pattern. He shifted in his seat, panic flickering beneath the surface. And you wrote it yourself. Karina turned back to the slides. The next set included statements. Emily R., Nathan V., and a third, a former intern who hadn't been mentioned yet. She described similar comments, similar touches, and Greg suggesting late-night strategy brainstorms. All signed, all verified. Greg started to sweat. Beads forming at his temple, his hands nervously wiping at his slacks. I didn't mean, he began. No one said you meant to, Karina said, gently interrupting. We're discussing what happened, not what you intended. That's when it hit him. He wasn't in a room with enemies. He was in a room full of records, receipts, logs, systems he thought didn't remember, but did, witnesses he thought he'd intimidated, but hadn't, an ecosystem he thought protected him, but it started tilting against him the moment his words stopped being whispers and started becoming data. He tried to pivot. This is a lot of effort for what? A few jokes? Is it? I asked, tilting my head. You've been submitting travel claims with double occupancy under single-person budgets. Your listed consultants don't exist in the professional registry. Your calendar doesn't align with site security logs. I didn't handle that. I had assistants. That's not on me. Except your signatures on all of them, I replied. Greg stood up. This is insane. This isn't even your company. Karina's voice was still calm. And yet, everything on that screen came from our systems. You gave us the data. He just helped us read it. The silence that followed was the kind that breaks things. Greg sat down, and for the first time since I met him, he looked small. Not performative humility, real, bone-deep small, like the smirk had cracked, and there was nothing behind it but fear and 1,000 decisions he thought would never come back around. He looked at Megan, maybe expecting sympathy, a softening, something. But Megan didn't look at him. She looked at me, and that was worse. Because Greg had finally figured out the real threat in the room. It wasn't anger, or volume, or drama. It was the man who never raised his voice and never missed a detail. The official email came through at 8:37 a.m. the next morning. Just one sentence buried in corporate language, dressed up in legalese. Gregory H. has been placed on administrative leave without pay, pending further investigation. No warning, no explanation, no farewell coffee in the break room. Just gone. Megan stared at the message on her screen for nearly a full minute, like if she blinked, it might vanish. She called me, didn't even wait for hello. They actually did it. Yes, I said. Suspended, no pay. They're bringing in legal from 2 other branches. Darren, he looked like he wanted to vanish during the panel. He will, I said, just not quickly. Later that day, she called again, quieter this time. The kind of quiet that usually means something unexpected just happened. They offered me interim leadership, just until the dust settles. They said, God, HR actually said, we regret the oversight in not addressing this sooner. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was inevitable. Corporate regret always shows up late, wearing borrowed empathy and hoping no one asks for receipts. But still, there it was, the first visible shift, not an apology that mattered, but a beginning. That night, Megan stood in the kitchen, barefoot, stirring pasta like she wasn't sure if she was hungry or just needed to do something with her hands. I leaned in the doorway, watching her. The silence between us had changed, not tense, not strained, just fuller, like we both understood something that didn't need words anymore. She looked over her shoulder at me. You didn't protect me, she said quietly. You dismantled him. I didn't say anything right away, just walked over, turned off the burner, and stood beside her. No, I said finally. I just showed him what silence really sounds like. She didn't nod, didn't speak, just looked at me like she was seeing something for the first time. Something that had always been there, just hidden beneath layers of mild smiles and patient nods. And maybe she was. Maybe we both were. I'd spent years watching men like Greg get away with things because they were loud, bold, and practiced in the art of being just barely deniable. They treated boundaries like rubber bands, stretchable, snap-proof, theirs to play with. But what they never learned is that real power doesn't make noise. It doesn't posture. It doesn't warn. It watches. And when the time is right, it removes. Greg's legal team fired off their first letter that evening, full of sharp edges and soft threats, wrongful suspension, reputational damage, procedural irregularities. But the company didn't flinch. Not this time. Too much risk. Too much already documented. Every page he'd signed, every timestamp, every conveniently misunderstood message. His lawyers were fighting a fire that had already consumed the house. Megan got flowers the next day from two former coworkers who had quietly left over the years. One card said simply, "Thank you for not staying quiet." She didn't cry, but she sat with the card in her hand for a long time, the way people sit with things that hurt less than they used to, but still leave fingerprints. Later, as we lay in bed, she turned to me in the dark. "I used to think you were just being distant, like you were above it all. I didn't realize you were just waiting." "I wasn't waiting," I said. "I was tracking." She laughed once, soft. "God, you're terrifying." "No," I said. "He should be terrified. I'm retired." She reached for my hand. And somewhere in the city, Greg sat in his apartment waiting for an HR call that wouldn't come, drafting a statement his lawyer would later advise against sending, wondering when the next hit would land, still not understanding that the worst part wasn't over. It had already happened. And it wore a quiet face. It was one of those perfectly polished corporate evenings, the kind designed to remind everyone that the company still had money, taste, and something resembling a soul. Crystal centerpieces, assigned seating, champagne flutes that nobody drank from, waitstaff moving like shadows between tables. I wasn't supposed to be there, at least not in Greg's mind, but there I was, standing beside Megan at the check-in desk, tux jacket sharp, expression unreadable. Her hand lightly resting on my arm, her smile cool, composed. She wasn't there to celebrate. She was there to be seen. Greg arrived fashionably late, because of course he did. Same smirk, a new suit, but his posture had changed, less swagger, more calculation, like he wasn't sure which glances in the room meant trouble. He walked with the caution of a man whose name had been removed from an org chart and returned in smaller font. When he saw us, the smirk cracked. Briefly, then he regrouped, pasted on something approximating charm, and headed straight toward us like a dog sniffing for a fence that might still have a gap. Megan stiffened slightly beside me. I gave her hand the faintest squeeze. Let him come. He waited until he was close enough that no one else could hear. No audience, no witnesses, just us. That was his first mistake. "You didn't have to go that far," he muttered. Not a challenge, not defiant, more wounded. Like I'd betrayed some unspoken man code of shoulder pats and silent complicity. I turned to face him, not fast, just enough to let the air change between us. "I didn't go far," I said evenly. "I went quiet." His brows knit, confused. "That's the part you never understood," I added. "You kept looking for volume, for outrage, for someone to fight. But silence?" I leaned in slightly, just enough. "Silence keeps receipts." Greg opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes flicked to Megan, then back to me. He wasn't used to being unsure of his place in a room. But now he didn't know whether to apologize or run. I didn't wait for him to choose. I turned, hand gently guiding Megan forward, our footsteps slow, deliberate, through the soft murmur of the dining hall. Conversations dipped as we passed. Not out of fear, but curiosity, recognition, respect. Behind us, Greg remained frozen. A man watching a wreck he caused sail smoothly past him. We didn't look back. We found our table near the front. Megan's name card bore her new title, embossed, centered, no asterisk, no interim, just hers. As she sat, she leaned toward me and whispered, "That's the last time he speaks to us, isn't it?" I nodded once. He's still trying to figure out what happened. And he never will, she said quietly. He'll blame HR, blame politics, say it was a witch hunt or a vendetta. What he'll never say is that he built the whole thing himself. I just held up a mirror. Later that night, during a speech, the CEO called Megan's work instrumental to our recent recovery efforts and thanked her for resilience in the face of internal disruption. No names, just acknowledgement. Real ones don't come in headlines. They come in subtle nods and reappearing respect. As the applause faded, I caught a glimpse of Greg seated near the back, alone, no name card in front of him, staring at the tablecloth like it had answers. And for a moment, I felt something I didn't expect. Not pity, not pride, just the echo of something very old and very final. Silence, the kind you don't recover from.